Welcome everyone to the webinar, Lighting Up the Dark Side of the Moon. We have Bharat from Tech Mahindra and Abhijit from Soroco. It's going to be an interesting session. It's an interesting topic on its own, lighting up the dark side of the moon, right? So we'll find out what the dark side of the moon is all about, right? But before we do that, quick introductions. Bharat Vasudevan is a Chief Capability Officer at TechM. He has 2 decades of experience in leadership roles across a lot of global Fortune 500 organizations. He has created, led several world-class teams with diverse skills and competencies, and his direct, he has a lot of direct P&L responsibilities over several large and complex portfolios, right? So thanks, Bharat, for joining in.
Pleasure to be here today, and a very good morning, afternoon, evening to everyone who's joined this session today. Happy to be here. Hello, Abhijit.
And we also have Abhijit. So Abhijit heads product growth at Soroco. So he has overall 24 years of experience in the industry across product organization and consulting. His experience includes building an industry-leading hybrid cloud management and automatic IT operations automation platform. If you get to meet him offline, you should ask him all about it. He's also experienced working in building corporate banking forex management product for an Indian retail bank, building high performance and scalable OLTP platforms for market data analytics, and he's driving our entire Scout portfolio at Soroco. So Abhijit, welcome to the webinar too.
Thanks, Somer, and hello everyone. Glad to be here along with Bharat. TechM and Soroco have been collaborating over the last 2.5 years, and we are working across multiple different industry verticals. Happy to kind of share and answer some of your questions today as we go through.
Perfect. Right. So quickly introducing myself too. My name is Somer, and I lead marketing at Soroco. And I'll be moderating this session today between Bharat and Abhijit. So Bharat, let me start with you, right? Probably the most important question. You have been working with so many clients now. So what, according to you, are the top challenges that clients face today, right, when it comes to the entire business operations space?
Thanks, Somer. And I think that's a pertinent question for the topic that we're going to discuss today. Look, let's understand what we mean by BizOps, right? And there are various views of what business operations is. But if you look at what is probably the most relevant definition of business operations today, it's all about the ability to create visibility across all functions in your business that enable you to do certain things with your business, both from a strategic perspective as well as from an operational perspective, right? So BizOps, in a nutshell, is about the how effectively and efficiently organizations are able to break functional silos, right? And the moment you're talking about breaking functional silos, I think you're talking about visibility across functions, which even for the best run organizations today, surprisingly, with all the technology at our disposal, is still a challenge that a lot of organizations are grappling with. So I would say the first challenge really is about visibility, right? The ability to see across functions and the ability to see the right kind of data at the right points in time across functions, right? And I think all of these are as important as being able to see data across the ecosystem. So I would say that is the single biggest challenge, right? Now, once you're able to create that kind of visibility, then to determine what data to leverage among all the data that you see today, with the kind of technology that we have at our disposal, you're able to create visibility, right? But even if you create visibility, there's just tons and tons of data. So are you able to extract relevant data to make meaningful conclusions, right? So it's not just about the availability of technology, it's about leveraging it to extract relevant data. And I would say that's the second challenge. And the third and possibly the biggest challenge is once you've created visibility, once you've extracted the right kind of data, what do you do about it? So encouraging adoption of technology to make sense out of that data, to create the right purpose out of that data, and therefore how easily are our employees, our customers, our external stakeholders able to adopt technology to drive data-driven insights. And adoption again is a loaded word because very often people underestimate the challenge of adoption and of change management. And I would say, therefore, that is the third biggest challenge that I see a lot of organizations grappling with, right? So in exactly that sequence of breaking functional silos to create cross-functional visibility, ability to sift through data and extract only what is meaningful, and then ensuring that there is adoption across the ecosystem would probably be the top three challenges that I see across organizations, big, small, across industries as well. So I think the challenge is fairly agnostic in nature. Of course, some organizations have are further down the maturity curve when it comes to dealing with these challenges, but I think the challenges persist. Ironically, the more technology at our disposal, the challenges sometimes get compounded, right? Sometimes a lot of choice is better than is worse than no choice, and we do see that that challenge persists today.
Yeah, that's called the problem of plenty, right? So I think with technology and this connected systems, I think that becomes a big problem. But it's interesting, Bharat, that you talked about the visibility piece or what we can call as that data-backed operational visibility. And Abhijit, if you can come in here, I presume a lot. That's a recurring theme with a lot of our customers too, right?
Yes, absolutely, Somar, right? And I think interesting that Bharat kind of outlined some of the key challenges which we are hearing in the industry as well, day in, day out, right? This problem of visibility is something what we qualify as the dark side of the moon, right? So what does the dark side of the moon mean? The dark side of the moon basically means today organizations have, as Bharat mentioned, right? There are multiple systems, there's multiple teams working on those systems, executing a myriad of processes or activities which they are doing. And today, the way the industry has evolved over the last 2 decades or so, we get visibility into how systems are performing work today per se, right? So we get a very good transactional experience, or we got a very good systemic experience of how work is done. But when we talk about understanding how those humans who are dealing with these applications or technologies and how do they actually carry out their day-to-day activities, it has typically been harnessed only through user interviews per se. So the ability for us to capture experiential data of how an invoice processing team is actually processing an invoice, what are they doing on 5 different applications to actually process an invoice, right? And then understand those patterns of work as to how, which we call the last mile of work, is something very key to kind of driving operational visibility, as Bharat mentioned, across functions, across silos, etc. And that exactly is what is we call as the dark side of the moon. The ability to shine light on the dark side of the moon, understand when a transaction is getting executed, it's not about how the system executes it, but how the human executes it across a myriad of applications. It could be SAP, Excel, just to name a few. It could be Outlook, it could be email. How does this complex potpourri work together? We understand the patterns of work and use that insight to drive and assess the impact on various different business KPIs. It could be understanding how your process is performing, how your business KPIs are performing. So the dark side of the moon is about unraveling, using this interaction data set and unraveling the unknown, and then understanding how better you can actually bridge the digital transformation or the change management initiatives which you want to kind of drive for your organization.
Yeah, interesting. So again, I'll come back to you, Bharat, right? I think whether we call it the dark side of the moon or we call it a visibility challenge, which eventually leads to a identification of a gap challenge, which eventually leads to an adoption challenge, right? I think that's the story that Bharat you were talking about. So how are your current customers dealing with it? I'm sure most people would be, they'll be cognizant about the problem. So how are they solving it?
Look, I think I'd actually take a step back. And when we talk about the dark side of the moon, Abhijit spoke about it, and he said, what are we trying to do? Are we, first of all, aware of the magnitude of the challenge? And are we aware of everything that is influencing that challenge, right? So the first step is to really figure out what is it that you have and what is the data that you need. And I think a lot of companies are actually beginning to understand this as the first problem, right? Because it's with the technology available at our disposal today, you can automate pretty much everything. You can create a very high level of intelligence across your ecosystem, but that's only provided you're looking in the right places. So I think slowly enterprises have started to look in the right places, starting with the customer, right? Starting with the information that is flowing from the customer all the way to every part of your organization. You need to start looking across your ecosystem. The moment you need to start doing that, I think organizations need to realize that it is virtually impossible for us to do all of this manually, and then to be able to collate this data manually and make sense out of it. And this is where a large number of the process intelligence tools that are available, and you guys are leading the pack in terms of some of the work that you're doing there. This is where the need to leverage technology is critical, right? And so I think enterprises have started to work on creating this data visibility and acknowledging that the only way for you to break these silos is to come with process intelligence tools that are able to work across these silos, right? So I think recognizing that manual effort will only get us so far, but at the same time, leveraging the human in the loop to make sense out of the information that's coming out of all the data that technology is processing is really where companies are focused today.
No, correct. So Abhijit, again, you speak with a lot of customers yourself, right? So what's your point of view here, right? What are our customers saying? Do you think customers are doing a great job right now figuring out how to light up the dark side?
Yeah, so I think the customers are obviously doing a good job in terms of understanding what they can do with the data, with the tools they have, right? But what we are talking about out here, as Bharat also highlighted, when we talk about the dark side of the moon, we are trying to basically address and bring into the enterprise a completely new source of data, right? Which is what we call as the interaction data source. Interaction data source is all about collecting, last mile information in terms of how humans are interacting with software at every click and keystroke level. Understanding the value of that data. So me and you, when we basically do our work on a day-to-day basis, right, we leave a digital footprint of about 2,800 interactions per day. Quantify that to a 500 million, office worker space, right? It's huge. It's basically trillions of interaction data points which are collected globally. And the reason why this is a new untapped data source is because that is something which people have not yet analyzed. It has been leveraged well by the website companies or the e-commerce companies when they're trying to map customer journeys using customer interaction data. But when we are talking about this side of the fence, which is inside the enterprise interaction data has not been leveraged, has not been tapped into, right? And the quantum of data we are talking about is 70 times more than what is typically available on social media sites. So this is possibly the largest man-made data set generated yet on Earth, and which is not tapped per se, right? Now, are customers doing a good job of leveraging it? First, they are discovering what is this data source. Now, what can it do, right, for our customers? It has been leveraged to solve a multitude of problems, right? One is when we talk about automation COEs per se, right? Automation COEs are grappling with creating a pipeline to automate. And what are they automating? They're trying to automate human effort, right? We talk about business process re-engineering per se, right? You're trying to re-engineer a process. The process could be re-engineered in two ways. It could be engineered from the way it gets executed inside a system, or you can re-engineer it from the standpoint of how a process specialist executes it on his or her for his or her work on a day-to-day basis, right? So the ability to kind of understand and discover a myriad of ways. Let me take the example of a global, big e-commerce player, and they have a large 3,500 people finance operations teams globally, which is operating across 6 countries, and they are doing everything, be it account receivable, account payable, payroll processing, all of those functions. To understand, and they have a challenge to basically drive automation and bring in year-on-year reduction of about 30 to 40%. They've already done the low-hanging fruits, which is they have tried to resolve what is possible and available through a systemic lens. But now they're trying to find additional pipeline, additional volume, right? And how do you get that? Because you can only do so much through systems per se. So you need to understand how humans are working, and then obviously this whole human data set is anonymized per se, so there is no threat to any individual per se. But what you're trying to collect is team level patterns of how an invoice processing team works, team level patterns of how a reconciliation team works, right? What are they doing? What are the sources of friction? Are they basically due to the way the application landscape has evolved over a period of time, do they have to do too much back and forth between applications? Do they have to copy and transport data from one application to the other application, right? So these are all the questions which, leveraging the interaction data set, these can be unraveled, leveraging the power of task mining or process intelligence, as many industry analysts call it. And one is you get visibility as to how actually work is happening on the ground, how processes are actually getting executed, what is the variance, what is the deviation per se, and ability to understand not only the sources of friction, but also get recommendations with the power of the data which is getting collected to basically try and optimize these processes per se to improve the business KPI. Let's say, for example, for this finance operations team, reducing the cost to serve per invoice processing was a major thing. So now organizations are beginning to discover and understand the value of interaction data, how it can help them solve not only process specific problem or a technology specific problem, but apply it at a business KPI level and ultimately impact all your key KPIs of business growth, cost reduction, customer experience, etc. So these are the ways. If I have time, I'll give another example, right? Let's talk, for example, in the case of customer experience, right? Typically, when large organizations have set up GBS centers, right, global business services centers or shared services centers, they are basically trying, there's a huge amount of straight through processing, which is already developed, right, through EDI or many other ways and norms. But if there are exceptions which systems cannot solve, then humans come into the play, right? And that's where we have large organizations set up, right, where TechM and Soroco kind of collaborate to basically drive these initiatives. Now, one of the customers wanted to understand how, by improving the operational experience of his or her internal team, how are they impacting the customer experience per se, right? So you can actually quantify how you work operationally, how does it impact a customer experience. So in this case, the function was trade settlements. So the ability for a customer to basically get a better settlement experience is directly proportional to the way, complex ad hoc work is done by a trade settlement team for an investment bank. So the ability for the investment bank to understand the different variations, the different ways in which trade settlement can actually be tackled, where things are going wrong, what are the areas wherein they can actually improve and digitally transform those steps or activities which are being done by the trade settlement team, actually led to a 40% improvement in customer experience per se, right, for trade settlement, which led to more business volume growth. So the interaction data is new, but it's getting leveraged way beyond the lens of automation or process excellence per se.
No, interesting. So, see, what I'm hearing both of you say, right, is that with this interaction data, right? I mean, you can bring visibility, and once you have the visibility, you can do tons on it, right? To fix things, right? So, one of the ways, probably the most common way of fixing things, at least till now, right, was automation, right? And I think both of you come from that background. So, my question is a little different. So, has the way people or customers the way they look at automation, has it changed? Because from what I'm hearing you guys say, right, is that all this while it was a lot about how you automate, but now I think it's becoming more about where to automate, right? And with the interaction data and the visibility that you get through it, you can actually fix that piece, and that just opens up a whole new world for everyone. Bharat, I mean, if you want to come in here, what's your thoughts?
Sure. So absolutely, Samar. So look, I think today the question is what/where to automate, right? I think we've sort of slowly now moving along, beyond the how to automate, because with a lot of things that that companies are doing today, the how to automate challenge is getting addressed. But I think what/where to automate is definitely the the number one question. And let me try and address this question and how companies are dealing with it with a couple of use cases that I can think of. Both of which are use cases where TechM and Soroco are working together with some of our large clients. Now, the first one that comes to my mind is this mid-luxury fashion company, US based. Set up about 15-20 years ago. They're growing fast, and we are supporting this client today in what they call their WISMO process, which is where is my order, right? And it was a very, very interesting engagement where TechM and Soroco in a period of 6 to 7 weeks, we've been able to add tremendous value to this client, all of which began with the question of what/where to automate, right? And if you actually look at the challenges that we had with this client, they were essentially threefold. First was that, compared to a lot of other similar companies, the WISMO team here was taking almost 33% higher handling time to handle queries on the average. And this is, given the nature of this industry, is a significant delta from where some of the best-in-class organizations were, right? The second staggering data point that we countered was, almost half of the activities that this team was performing was manual in nature. And the third was the difference between the best performing advisors within the team and some of the not so good performing advisors was almost 70%. So some of the best advisors were able to solve customer queries 3 times faster than the others, right? So we're looking at handle times that are higher than industry averages. You're looking at an extraordinarily high level of manual data processing, and you're looking at huge amount of variation between the best in standards within the same engagement and the not so good, right? Now, in a 6 to 7 week period, right, with whatever we did with the client and with the tools and technologies that we were able to, deploy, we were able to, first of all, clearly identify process variations. We were able to quickly define what a standard process should look like. What should a typical end-to-end cycle time look like? Once we were able to define the best process, we were able to then identify knowledge gaps, training gaps, which means we were able to quickly say that, look, here are areas where typically advisors are getting stuck and therefore will need intervention. We were able to deploy a lot of technology to make this training more effective and efficient. And most importantly, we were able to identify at least 15 different areas which are ripe for automation, which are possibly likely to yield maximum benefit. And we were able to knock off almost 1,800 hours of effort across the entire team by just doing these 3 things, right? So a classic example of how once you're able to define the right process, once you're able to define what best-in-class looks like within the process, once you're able to identify clearly where there are employee skill issues, and then you apply an automation layer on top of it, you're going to be able to address all the challenges associated with the process. And obviously, the net outcome there is a significant increase in CSAT, right? And an ability to solve, solve customer queries much faster than what you were doing earlier, right? The other example that I can think of, which is in a completely different industry, which is one of the US's largest private PNC insurance distribution companies. And there, this was with respect to the renewals and cancellation process. And the extra element that we were able to introduce into this process through some of the process intelligence tools that we were able to bring together was really around the element of self-service, right? Typically, an advisor was spending almost 30 hours after a customer call in just putting together the data from different systems, for renewals or cancellations. So by introducing a very high level of self-service and driven by backend automation, we were able to bring down this 30 hours of manual effort that agents were actually undertaking outside of the process. for all the benefits that you saw in the earlier example, plus the fact that we were able to introduce a very high level of self-service into the process, I think ended up giving us a very good outcome, again, in a fairly short period of 7 to 8 weeks, right? So I think the challenge continues to remain on what and where to automate, but with some of the processes and techniques that are available at our disposal today, I think we've started to address this challenge very effectively.
So, Bharat, my next question is also to you. Help me understand where are the barriers to adoption now. So, you have products like us in the market. There are a lot of different ways you can solve this problem. There are a lot of process intelligence tools, different nomenclatures being used. But what are the primary concerns that customers that you have when they have these conversations with you in terms of adopting some of these technology to solve some of these problems? Which, if I just hear both of you, right, looks very, it looks crystal clear that there's a problem and there's a technology that can solve it. So my question goes back to what is stopping people from adopting more process intelligence tools out there?
So I think the challenge is, let's look at the challenge from two perspectives. Okay, one is what are customers saying in terms of customers, technology and process organizations, what are they talking about? Their number one challenge is integration. So their challenge is, look, how is process intelligence as a technology going to sit in my ecosystem, in my current landscape? How standalone is it? Do we need to integrate this with all my backend systems? And if so, what are some of the data and security challenges that I have to grapple with? And therefore, what is the ease of implementation? I think that's the integration, and the quantum of integration that is required is possibly the challenge from the customer's internal perspective, right? When it comes to being able to leverage this, I think employee challenge is that of adoption, right? So if I am an agent and if I am servicing my customer today, irrespective of whichever process there is, whether it's a customer experience process, whether it's a back office process, what I don't want is to get overwhelmed with a lot of information at my disposal, right? So ease of adoption, my ability as a customer-facing executive within my customer organizations to be able to see data very simplistically and therefore solve my customer queries is going to drive better adoption. The simpler and easier it is, the higher the adoption is going to be. So I think there is a challenge with respect to addressing integration, and there is a challenge with respect to employee adoption, both of which I think are the top two challenges that I see from an adoption standpoint.
Right. So I think there's a privacy angle to this too, and I'll come to that in a bit. But before we do that, Abhijit, what is your take on this, right? In terms of ease of adoption, again, we keep talking to multiple customers week on week. So what's your view on the concerns that Bharat had called out?
Yeah, no, I think those are very fair concerns, right? As I said, this is a very new data source which is kind of making its way into the enterprise. Now, from an ease of adoption standpoint, as Bharat rightly put, right? One is, okay, you are gonna have to collect data at a desktop level, which is what we're calling as the last mile. So does it intrude what I'm doing? No. If it's silent, if it's non-invasive, that's a big tick mark, right? Which we basically do. Second is, from the construct of, do I have to do a lot to kind of teach your tool to understand what my activities or processes are per se? And if the answer is in single digits, that's again solves the barrier of adoption, because you want more out of the box capabilities, wherein it's non-invasive and it is not also effort intensive on the customer side. Third is, do you need to integrate into all of my systems for you to work, right? Which means there's a big IT process around it. So if it is non-invasive in its truest sense, wherein you don't actually need to tap into anything, but you can actually sniff event logs at an operating system level, right? Which is very, very important and key. Then you are actually non-invasive. The adoption is a lot easier from an IT department. So there are different stakeholders. There's an IT stakeholder, then there's a security stakeholder, right? Where the privacy angle comes in, as you rightly put. Now, from a privacy standpoint, I think one of the biggest things which organizations need to grapple with is my data being understood? Is my identity being revealed? And the answer is no, right? When you anonymize the data at source and you understand only team patterns and not individual patterns, it gives a huge sigh of release across the multiple customers we have worked on together, right? Because, hey, it's not about me, it's about a larger purpose, which is the business goal, right? And there's evangelization sessions which are driven. The second aspect is, okay, if I have sensitive data per se, are you capturing everything? No, I'm not capturing everything. I'm only looking at what you allow us to capture from a business tool standpoint, right? So that's the second element. If there is business PII data, is there a way to, scrub it before it even hits the disk? And if you can do that, that quells a lot of things. So all of these questions, which I'm kind of narrating out here, have been we've been answering through various workers councils in very stringent regulatory regions like Europe, France, especially France and Germany, in Europe and other places, etc., where it becomes very easy for them to kind of understand. And then there are actual show me how it works demos, which can basically help them better get confidence in terms of navigating this. So these questions will not go away, but are the answers to the questions crystal clear enough such that the ease of adoption is easier and you're able to basically give a message to the user communities who are carrying out various different business activities that it's your effort to basically optimize the larger business goal, which is what at play, and that becomes very seamless for organizations to adopt, right? In fact,
Yeah, absolutely.
Today CIOs are leveraging this data to kind of identify how can they rationalize and optimize the complex IT spaghetti which they have created. They have thousands of apps, if not hundreds, right? How do you leverage this data set to optimize the application portfolio and reduce licensing costs? That's a huge asset, right, per se. Secondly, organizations are looking at it like when two organizations are merging, per se, right? They are trying to understand organization A and organization B. Obviously, there might be overlap in people, overlap in processes, overlap in technologies. The interaction data is the best source to effectively create a baseline across all these areas and try to solve it. So the adoption is increasing. Once customers have navigated through the first few hoops of understanding that this is non-invasive, non-intrusive, they themselves are coming up with these use cases on how to leverage the interaction data set. So we are seeing adoption go across areas, as I said, mergers and acquisitions, IT portfolio rationalization, and many other areas, right, in terms of driving synergies within organizations.
Yeah. So I think, and I'll probably ask my last question to Bharat, and Bharat, you probably already guessed it. But before I do that, so I think we have 20 odd attendees. So if there are any questions that you'd want to ask Abhijit or Bharat, right time to start sending your questions, right? I think we'll still have some time. All right, Bharat, so I'm going to extend that conversation, right? Abhijit did talk about privacy and security, right? And I understand that's always going to be a concern everywhere, especially when you work with larger enterprises, right? For them, it's a non-negotiable. So how has your experience been like, right? What are the primary concerns that people have around privacy and security? Do you share the sentiment that Abhijit shared, right? That once people understand, what it really means, the very fact that PII data is generally never ever compromised, right? So they themselves become champions of a product like this. So what's your thought process, right? You work with many customers, a lot of large customers. Very curious to hear this answer.
Yeah, and I think in some sense, Somar, Abhijit addressed this when he spoke about challenges of adoption. I think the more localized some of this technology is, the more it is, the less the need for it to sort of talk to multiple, applications or systems, just from a data collection standpoint. Look, ultimately, when you start to integrate insights, it has to talk everywhere. But when it comes to being able to collect this data, as long as the tools that we are deploying and what we've been doing together is a great example of that. As long as it sits locally and unobtrusively, I think to a large extent, the first step of being able to deploy some of this technology to start collecting the kind of data and intelligence that we want is the first concern is significantly mitigated, right? I also think the second point that Abhijit you made, and I think that's a very pertinent point, is are we collecting individual transaction data, or are we collecting patterns? Are we collecting process data? Are we collecting data that is more relevant across the system? And I think the moment we are look, there was a time when process intelligence started with mapping keystrokes, right? Understanding things at a keystroke level. But we've come a long way since then. We've come a long way where we are able to extract data only at a workflow level, at a process level, right? And I think that, again, to a large extent, mitigates concerns around where data is coming from and what we're doing with it, right? The third and possibly the most important is to be able to show visible outcome of what we are doing with this data and how it's impacting customers, impacting employees, ideally both. So if we're able to show the impact of all of the data that we are generating and analyzing, I think that again improves adoption significantly. The best way to do that again is to create relevant proofs of concept, right? So ensure that we're picking the right processes, solving for a smaller problem first, especially when you're in a new client environment, demonstrating that the outcome works, and then putting in place the levers to scale it, right? So I think if we are able to do these three things, in my view, we are able to mitigate some of the concerns that clients rightly have and demonstrate the right kind of outcomes.
Cool. Thanks, Bharat. This was useful, and I hope everyone who's listening finds it very insightful too. So thanks, Bharat. Thanks, Abhijit. I think we should open the forum for questions. Balvinder, can we open the forum and get people to ask questions over chat if possible?
Yeah. Hello. You can ask the questions now. The forum is open. Please, you can post the questions either on chat or raise your hands, and I'll unmute you. Send you an unmute request to, unmute you, and then you can ask the question directly to the speakers. Kindly go on.
I'm getting a few questions on chat. In case nobody else has question, I can ask a few, but we'll wait for 10 more seconds. Is someone trying to ask a question?
Nothing on the chat yet.
All right. No, I got a message. Okay, very fundamental question. We'll toss who wants to take this, Bharat or Abhijit. Very simple, but very fundamental question. What's the difference between process mining and task mining? I don't think we use these words today, but yeah, I think it's an important question.
I'm gonna let Abhijit take that first. I'm sure he'll address it well. I don't need to come in now.
Yeah. So no, I think that's a fundamental question, right? I mean, it's all about mining. Then why this difference between process and task per se, right? So if you look at this, the way our industry has evolved, right? The various organizations have been dealing with multitudes of technologies. First came the ERP revolution, right? In which people implemented ERP at scale, and then they figured out that there are performance issues. So they try to they're trying to understand what to do with solving those performance issues. Then you add to the complex potpourri, and the web systems came into play. And the web systems had to interact with the ERP system. It made things even more complex per se, right? And organizations were trying to understand, okay, I have part of my, this ERP application on the web, part of it on premise. How does things work if I were to, find out performance bottlenecks? And to address some of these issues, and also the process teams, right, in organizations have started formulating process excellence COEs. So they were trying to answer the larger organizational question of how do I optimize a process which is being done across multiple countries? And the answer was logs. If these structured large-scale ERP applications have huge logs, right, that was the golden source which was untapped at that point in time. And that's where process mining evolved. Process mining is all about understanding transactional data inside logs and assessing and mapping how a process functions within a system per se, not across systems, functions within one application per se, right? So that's where, but then the fundamental need is you need to have logs. No logs, you can't analyze it. Now let's come to task mining. So task mining kind of, the revolution started when the RP revolution was already underway, and people were trying to figure out what to automate bots, and they were trying to identify tasks to automate, right? For large shared services teams or contact centers or other organizations. And that's how the genesis of that took place. But then the answer then was record something, capture it, and then replay it and automate it. So that is how it was more task capture, but it was not mining yet. That's when technologies evolved and people started to leverage either OCR or optical character recognition or computer vision to try to understand when people are doing 5 to 6 activities at a point in time. How can you understand what is it that they are doing and aggregate that pattern to understand the AHT per se, right? As Bharat put it. But AHT is not something which you can actually get with task data because it is more experiential in nature. It is not transactional in nature. So that's where companies like us, we started evolving the space to basically figure out how do we look at work sequences using AI ML models to try to understand and comprehend and discover tasks, discover processes across not 10 to 20 to 30 users, but hundreds of users, arrive at patterns basically, and then discover a process and create an organizational work graph, right? So that's how the genesis started, wherein you are now able to impact not a process outcome within an app, but you are able to impact an organizational outcome looking at interaction data, collecting clicks and keystrokes. So the fundamental thing is that data sources are different. This is about transactional log. This is about interaction data. And that's the fundamental new data source.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'm looking at the question from Asad on the window, and it says, how should clients get started? Which ones to choose? I don't think, clients should worry about which ones to choose. The client start is always with the problem statement. That is how it's been. That's how it's going to be going forward. I mean, if you go back to the two examples I was giving you, in the first one, the client said, look, my Wismo process is broken today. I'm not where I need to be. My clients are not happy. So we need to solve for that problem. In the second example, the client said, look, my renewals and cancellations are not where they need to be, and we need to solve that problem. So I think the client's ask will always be the outcome. Abhijit explained the difference between process mining and task mining. And I think that difference, and to be able to understand that difference and give the client a solution that addresses what they need to do from a process mining perspective and a task mining perspective is really where companies like us, the likes of Tech Mahindra come in today, and which will continue to be the ask going forward, right? So the more outcome oriented this can be, the better it is for service providers like us, the better it is for clients. So I don't think the clients, I don't think discerning clients will ever ask us which ones to choose. Discerning clients will only say, here is the outcome I need to drive. Now you tell us what you're going to bring and why you're going to bring what you're going to bring to solve this problem, right?
Bharat, I see another interesting question. Customers definitely don't have to think in terms of whether it's process mining or task mining that will take them to the end outcome, right? I think they have partners to figure out the journey, but the end outcome is what the customer would always be looking at. So how would you address questions around return on investment on any technology, right? For example, you're investing on a process excellence tool or a task mining tool or a process mining tool, whatever nomenclature you use, right? How would you tie it to an outcome, and how would you show ROI, like as a partner?
I think it's an extension of what I was saying earlier on what clients want, right? The first step is, definition of the problem statement, Somar. And if I'm able to say that, look, the problem that I'm solving for is, say CSAT from a order in the same first example that I took. Where is my order? Suppose my outcome metric is improvement in client satisfaction, right? There are ways and means in which various companies define that today. As long as I'm able to tie what I'm deploying for the client back to that outcome metric, I'm able to then quantify how I've improved that outcome, right? And if I'm able to quantify how I've improved that outcome, then that in turn can tie back to the technology that I've invested to make it happen, right? We don't get this right all the time because very often, there are multiple factors that, drive outcome. I'll take a completely different example. One of the BPaaS solutions that we've launched in recent times, Yantra, is essentially for optimizing field services for our telecom clients. Field services continues to be a significant area of both concern and differentiation for a lot of leading telcos around the world. Now, when you look at optimization of field services, it's a very large term, right? For some clients, it just means the ability to service orders better. For some clients, it just means managing cost of field services a lot better than what they're doing today. For some clients, it's a direct impact on upsell and cross-sell, right? So the moment we are able to define what the client wants and the outcome that they desire more than the others, then we are able to link it back to the various intelligence tools and technologies that we're deploying to drive that outcome, and therefore then establish our way, right? So it's not a silver bullet. We don't get it right all the time. But I think the closer you're able to define it to outcome, the better your chances are of defining ROI very clearly, transparently, and unambiguously.
Makes sense. Balvinder, how are we doing on time? Can we take one more question?
Absolutely. We have time. We can pick up the next question also.
All right. So let's see.
So there's another question on the chat.
Yeah, there's a question on how do you choose a vendor? I can't ask Abhijit that question because of conflict of interest, right? So Bharat, why don't you give it a shot and I'll see if Abhijit can add something to that.
Look, I think I'm going to be parroting the same point. For me, the work that we do always begins with what the client wants. Once I know what the client wants, I know from a system integration and service provider perspective, I know what I need to do to deliver that outcome. And then we've always believed from a TechM perspective that it is an ecosystem play today, right? Where there is IP that we bring in organically, but then there is capability that specialist providers like Sirocco bring to the table. So if I'm able to define the outcome that I want to drive, I'm obviously then able to define which are the partners that we need to bring in from the ecosystem to make that outcome happen, right? That's the first step in terms of saying, look, how do I choose the right service providers to make that outcome happen? That's the strategic part. Now, tactically, then a lot of other things play out, right? The ability to, collaborate and co-create better for the client, the ability to make certain investments, because very often when you talk about BizOps, when you talk about process intelligence, there is a huge need to show outcome first before you go and ask the client for, to be compensated for that outcome. So what that also means is that with the landscape that is evolving, we have to have the ability to invest in certain opportunities. So obviously, working with partners like Sirocco over a whole bunch of others helps, because the ability to then invest upfront, demonstrate outcome through proofs of concept, and then look to scale is much higher. So I think that becomes an important metric when we, sort of identify the providers and partners that we want to work with.
Abhijit, anything that you'd add? The customers who talks to a lot of our, competitors. They generally look at the entire landscape of what's available, right? So, what kind of questions do you generally get around this entire space?
Yeah, no, I think very fair questions, right? So one of the first things which customers are looking to evaluate, right, across is I think as Bharat rightly put forth, right? I mean, they don't need to evaluate between one vendor like process mining versus task mining because both solve completely different purposes, and that can give them a holistic outcome. But if you talk about from a task mining standpoint or process intelligence or process understanding, there are many names floating around of this, right, in the industry. The thing to kind of keep in mind is that are you trying to solve a strategic problem, right, which could be basically which could be driven by understanding how your teams are working together, right? Because that's the bane. And it's important to assess, tools from that standpoint. So are we looking at, getting process mining plus plus? Then obviously you're not going to need to go to a task mining tool per se because there are various analytical tools on top of process mining which you can get. But from a task mining standpoint, are you trying to basically solve issues like, can I get a better capacity planning done for my team once I understand what are the issues which they are encountering on a day-to-day basis? If I improve the employee experience, is my team's overall throughput likely to get better per se? So that's one aspect. Am I looking to basically resolve through human mistakes? Can I do better compliance for the data which is being captured by my agents? And can that help me potentially either give customer service better, or can it help me ensure that when I'm trying to comply to certain regulatory norms, my data conformance capture is right? I mean, and that's where I'll be able to better comply to the needs of an authority per se, right? So are you looking at solving strategic problems, but you're trying to understand the human impact of that per se? Obviously, automation, digital transformation, they are core per se, but it answers a myriad of questions. So it's important that you look at the evolution of your tool strategically, not just for an automation per se. Automation is at the core. It's the simplest problem which it can potentially tackle, but you need data-backed evidence. So the more visibility you get, the better you can correlate it and get a business case going for driving, org-wide change.
Perfect. Perfect. I think that's basically it. Then I think it's wrap up time. Unless Balvinder, Bharat, or Abhijit, anyone who wants to make any last comment, maybe about the partnership that we have with each other.
It's been a great session. Thank you, Somar, for coordinating this. Abhijit, great insights. Hopefully we've been able to address some of the burning questions that the attendees might have had. Happy to share some of our thoughts. I mean, happy to welcome inputs from a lot of the attendees post this session as well. There's no one right answer to a lot of things that we're doing. It's been a terrific partnership. Abhijit, you mentioned a couple of years. It feels a lot longer than that. I think we've managed to deploy some of our solutions very effectively with some of the clients that we're working for. The future looks very promising. The ecosystem is panning out well. So looking forward to some very interesting and exciting times ahead for this partnership and beyond. So thank you to everyone who's taken the time out to attend the session today.
No, I think thanks, Bharat, and I think it's been great, trying to solve customers' problems across industries, be it retail, fashion, telco, insurance, media, etc. We continue to kind of collaborate and drive, solving customers' key pain points and helping them improve their business outcomes. So looking forward to continue that journey. And folks, feel free to reach out to any of us in terms of understanding, conducting workshops, get onto the bandwagon of whatever you choose to call it, task mining, process intelligence, process understanding, if you're influenced by any of the industry analysts. But we are happy to answer your questions and get this going. Thank you.
Or we can just call it lighting up the dark side of the moon.
Absolutely. There you go.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thanks, everyone. Lovely
Thank you,
conversation.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Abhijit.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for
Thanks,
sharing such deep
Bye-bye.
insights. A special panelist, Mr. Bharat Vasudevan and Mr. Abhijit Shroff. And a special thanks to Mrs. Somal Deka also for moderating the whole session. And a big thanks to all of those who joined the session. I'm sure we'll be sharing the recording of this session soon with all of you, and you can reach out to us anytime and write back to us. Thank you so much. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Great job of putting this whole thing together. Thanks a lot for all your effort as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Balwinder and Somer. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.